I thought the hardest part of owning this cabin was keeping the property maintained. It was isolated, quiet, and far from the nearest town. Then I noticed tire tracks leading straight toward my private driveway. Someone had been coming onto my land while I was away. 2 trucks appeared near my gate before sunset. 3 men climbed out and started unloading tools. They weren't contractors I had hired, and they weren't supposed to be there. I stayed hidden long enough to find out exactly what they wanted. The next morning, I found an official-looking notice nailed to my gate. It claimed the HOA had authorized an inspection of my property. The problem was simple. The HOA didn't know my cabin or the land around it. I had the deed, the survey, and every boundary document to prove it. By noon, the same men were back. This time, they walked straight toward my front door. One of them told me they had orders to enter the cabin. I told them calmly that they were standing on private property. The man with the clipboard said the HOA had approved the entry. He even threatened to call the police if I refused. I almost laughed because the paperwork he showed me had nothing to do with my parcel. Then he made one mistake that changed everything. I had installed security cameras around the property years earlier. Every movement near my gate had been recorded. The footage showed exactly who entered, when they entered, and what they did. Now I had evidence instead of just an argument. Then Karen herself arrived. She stepped out of her SUV like she already owned the place. She demanded that I hand over the cabin keys immediately. I simply asked her one question. Can you show me the deed? I opened the survey and pointed directly at the boundary line. The cabin, driveway, forest, and every structure around were clearly inside my parcel. Karen stared at the map and suddenly stopped talking. But she still wasn't ready to admit she had made a mistake. What Karen didn't know was that my wife was a county sheriff's deputy. Rachel had been working a long shift and was finally heading home. She had no idea there was a confrontation waiting at our cabin, and she was about to arrive at exactly the right moment. Rachel stepped out of the sheriff's SUV and immediately recognized me. Then she looked at the strangers standing on our property. Her expression changed when she saw the paperwork in Karen's hands. Nobody knew yet that the entire confrontation had just changed direction. Rachel took the paperwork from Karen and read every page carefully. She compared the address on the document with our actual property boundary. Then she looked at Karen and calmly asked who had authorized the entry. For the first time, Karen had absolutely nothing to say. The 3 men suddenly stopped acting so confident. Rachel asked each of them for identification and proof of authorization. Their stories started falling apart almost immediately. They realized they were standing on private land with no legal permission to enter. I showed Rachel the security footage from the previous day. It clearly captured the men entering through my gate without permission. It also showed Karen directing them toward the cabin. That footage turned her story into something very different. Karen suddenly claimed she thought the property belonged to the HOA. Rachel asked why she had brought 3 men and tools to enter a private cabin. Karen couldn't give a straight answer. Every explanation she gave created another problem. Rachel gave everyone one simple instruction: step away from the property. She explained that they had no authority to enter my cabin. The men slowly backed away from the porch. Karen still refused to accept that her plan had failed. One of the men finally admitted they had been told to force their way inside. Rachel immediately took control of the situation. The man was placed in handcuffs without a struggle. Karen's face told me she finally understood how serious this had become. Karen kept insisting she had only been following HOA instructions. But Rachel showed her the survey and security footage again. The evidence proved that the HOA had no authority over my cabin. Now, Karen had to explain why she sent people onto private property. The investigation uncovered something even bigger. The HOA board had been using its authority far beyond the neighborhood boundaries. They had approved an entry order for land they didn't control. And now there was a record of everything they had done. One by one, the men were escorted away from my property. Their trucks were left behind while the investigation continued. Karen stood beside her SUV completely silent. The same people who arrived demanding my keys were now leaving in handcuffs. By sunset, the cabin was quiet again. My property was still mine, my evidence was secure, and the trespassers were gone. Rachel looked at me and smiled. knowing we had handled everything the right way. And from that day forward, the HOA knew one thing for certain. My land was not theirs to control.